Russell Wilson. We can count up here for the big reveal. 3, 2, 1. Yeah. All right. Hey, everybody. It is week 11. And, well, we can keep each other company as the game, maybe not so much keeping us company. Let's go ahead and get a game update. Matt Waldman, Falcons Patriots. I don't know exactly how we can get to 28-3 in this one. We may not need to.
No, I don't think we're going to need to in this one. I mean, certainly Mac Jones has looked efficient, found, Nelson Aguilar early over the middle on a blown coverage where Falcons linebackers basically got mixed up and left Aguilar wide open alone over the middle for a touchdown. They've had a couple of field goals tacked onto that. Atlanta was able to blitz Mac Jones and be able to get a nice sack of him on a play action pass, but really most of the action for the defense inside of, sacking a quarterback has been on New England, being able to sugar gaps and confuse the right tackle and be able to get in there with an easy sack of Ryan, though, as our Emery Hunt would say, on Twitter, why was Matt Ryan even remotely taking that sack? He could probably thrown the ball away, but Ryan's foot is hurting. He's probably a little beaten and confused at this point of the season after the line play that they've gotten out of Atlanta in time. Kadri Ollison might be the only spark on this team along with Russell Gage. Mm-hmm. Ollison's like angry, probably running angry that they even cut him in the first place. But with, Cordell Patterson out, it looks like they called Ollison back up. He's had a couple of nice cutback runs, but otherwise the Atlanta Falcons line is really the story here, which is that they can't protect, they can't open consistent creases, and basically if you played Russell Gage, it's probably good for you just because he was a kind of a replacements recommendation this afternoon as a guy that will give you a lot of underneath looks, but the problem is that anything past about 15 yards and he just took a hard hit colliding with Tajay Sharp on an intermediate pass that might put him out of this game for at least a series. And, you knew what was going to happen with Kyle Pitts. He was going to get the Travis Kelce, Tony Gonzalez double coverage bracket if we have to resort to it, punt return, gunner type of blocking routine to keep him out of the game because they'd rather win with Matt Ryan thrown to a bunch of guys he's not completely trusting and familiar with by comparison to, say, Patterson and Ridley, who are no longer on the field for, some time now.
Yeah, you knew when no Calvin Ridley. And I think they said something during the broadcast, he'll be out until at least late November, which we're kind of getting to late November anyway. Mm-hmm. But at least it leaves open the possibility that he could come back. Kyle Pitts, well, Bill Belichick gushed about Kyle Pitts. And when you take away Patterson and Ridley, then of course you're going to take away Kyle Pitts. That's not even Bill Belichick's brilliance there. That's just really straightforward. Another wrinkle to this game, Chris, I compared Bill Belichick to Old Testament God because nobody thought that Ramondre Stevenson was going to get a lot of work last week because he didn't practice. Bill Belichick's not going to play a rookie back who didn't practice all week. And he not only got a lot of work, I think it was Mike Clay who put out the benchmarks of like 80% of the carries and 20% of the targets. And in the last 10 years or so, only 4 times ever has a Patriots running back done that, period. It's just not like the Patriots. It's not like the Patriots to feed a running back like that. So what do they do when Damian Harris comes back? Well, it's mostly Damian Harris. Ramondre Stevenson has had a nice run. Assuming this holds form, Stevenson could also go off in garbage time or something like that. But assuming this holds form, would you tell folks just throw Ramondre Stevenson back yet again? He's like the give a penny, take a penny. I mean, he's just been in and out of rosters all season. Would you recommend patience or say, yep, it's Belichick, don't even bother trying to figure this out?
No, I think this is more patience than anything else. I mean, and I think I remember seeing that exact same tweet. And if I'm remembering correctly, that was from JJ Zacharyson.
Oh, JJ, sorry.
69% of the running back carries, 21.7% target share, if I'm remembering also correctly, 4 times since 2011, since that's happened. And seeing all of that, seeing that production, that efficiency from Stevenson, I don't know how you can really put that back in the bottle. But of course, I mean, like you just mentioned, with Bill Belichick essentially playing God, like in that backfield, as we've seen him for years do this to us with folks calling it essentially Bellatrix when we evaluate running backs like from the Patriots. I understand why folks would immediately want to go back to just saying it's Damian Harris's backfield. Let's not even worry about the rest of the guys, but let's also contextualize this game. I mean, they've been in control of this game essentially since after the Falcons' first drive, right?
The coin toss.
Yeah, since that's actually even better. I mean, it's pretty much since been then that they've had control of this game. So with Damian Harris, I mean, with the Patriots being in control of this game, wouldn't you expect Damian Harris to be the one that they would trot out there? I mean, play after play after play. Now, Ramondre Stevenson, for all the work that he did this past week, Damian Harris was their lead back leading up to him being placed on the COVID list and being out for last week, or not the COVID list, but being out because of the concussion. So I would expect Harris to come back and start this week. I would also expect both of them to see some sort of timeshare moving forward. I mean, looking at their upcoming schedule, they've got Tennessee in week 12. They've still got their 2 matchups against Buffalo, which should be fairly competitive matchups as well. So they're not always going to be in these types of games. They're not going to always be in these types of games where it's just going to be efficient passing from Mac Jones. Let's go ahead and put up, I'm guessing, looking at the score and how much time's left in this game, they're probably going to get maybe one more touchdown. It'll probably get out of here like a 23-0, 23-3 type of game.
Right.
It's not always going to be this way. I mean, even talking about Stevenson's workload, what about Hunter Henry? We've barely heard of anything from him tonight as well, when he's been one of the primary targets for Mac Jones. So I'm thinking this is more of a game flow, game script type of thing for Stevenson. The same thing that most folks are going to say about Hunter Henry after tonight too. So I would hold him. We'll see what the workload is going to look like over the next couple of weeks, and then take it from there.
And one of the reasons to hold him, I learned this from a very smart man who's beneath me right there. Offensive line. It's the Patriots' offensive line. You want running backs that are running behind this line, and you can see it tonight, and you can see how it fits into their game script. And as we were talking, by the way, Stevenson ripped off like a 13-yard run. So he's saying, yeah, don't drop me. Actually, if you look at the stat sheet, he's right there with Damian Harris, even though it's Damian Harris as a starter. Okay. Thanks to Julia Bryant, we got these great thumbnails. Should we trust Russell Wilson? And Matt, this one was especially for you, man. I wanted to tee this one up. because Russell Wilson, and it's not necessarily Russell Wilson's fault, but has he ever put together a whole fantasy season? Never. It used to be the first half of the season would be slow, and then you wanted him in the second half of the season, back in the Doug Baldwin days. Then lately, it's been the first half of the season. He starts out hot. Last year, in the second half of the season, more often than not, Matt, if you were fading all of your options on the Seahawks, I guess DK Metcalf came out okay, but they were all significantly down from what they did in the first half of the year. Now, we've seen Russell Wilson come back. You can say he came back too early, maybe. It's Green Bay. He's never done anything in Green Bay. It was cold. Aaron Rodgers was uncomfortable. But people are going to have lineup decisions to make about Wilson, about Tyler Lockett. Probably not going to bench DK Metcalf. Like, I'd be afraid DK Metcalf would find out and he'd be mad at me, and I don't even want to experience what that would be like. So I'm not going to.
I wouldn't worry about it too much, because he tried to punch you and not know which way to throw the punch. Because based on what I saw on film, is that he didn't seem to know how to catch a football.
And just wear a helmet, because he'll try and punch you through the helmet.
Exactly. Wear the helmet and just tell him to punch you right here. And once he wouldn't know whether to. He wouldn't know. So right. I mean, you'd be fine. So, but yeah, go ahead.
What do we do with Wilson? I mean, do you go back in coming off of the first shutout of his career, or do you start somebody like, I don't know, Kirk Cousins or Jimmy Garoppolo over him?
Well, if you have Kirk Cousins, I think you start him. I think you pretty much look at the weapons he has, the way the offensive line is playing, and the matchup against Green Bay, where you would think that Rodgers will rebound a little bit, and the way that Cousins has been playing, and feel like you got to give that a shot, even though I know having the Minnesota fan base basically camp in my Twitter timeline for this week after a couple of nice highlights of Cousins and listening to them discuss, set up camp for literally a week there. and have like a nice discussion, but it's been like kind of unnerving to have this like nice discussion from a fan base on Twitter. They're always worried that the shoe's going to drop. The other shoe's going to drop with Kirk Cousins at any moment. And as much as the Chargers have a top 10 passing defense, I've always thought that they're kind of a paper champion in terms of defense, run or pass. And so, Green Bay can be a little bit better, but I would probably roll with Cousins this week. If you have to go with Garoppolo or Wilson, nah, man, go with Wilson. I just think that, the thing with Garoppolo is that he is playing Jacksonville, but but Jacksonville's going to be able to get run on too. So I think they're going to run Jacksonville out of the stadium. And it's whether it's, Eli Mitchell, Jeff Wilson, Trey Sermon, me, you on roller skates. I don't know. I think they'll figure it out with that offensive line. Whoever he likes that day, if the waiter recommends, something and says, "Hey, I can run the football and I'll do whatever you tell me, Kyle," then, he'll probably play him. But the thing is that I think that with Wilson, yes, I think you will eventually be able to trust him. Because they have enough, in terms of the offensive line has played better than in recent years. The receivers are, Metcalf is a year wiser. I like what they've been doing with Lockett. So I would give that another opportunity, at least, for at least another game or two. Now, if you get to a point where the next couple of games he still looks like he did against Green Bay, then maybe you play the odds of saying, well, he's never put up a back, wire to wire season, and then you just play those odds and say, forget it, I'm not rolling with him.
And you might have had the experience of this last year. Although if you had the experience of this last year, you probably didn't draft him this year, or you probably were tired of him, because last year we kept waiting for it to turn over to get back to the first half form, and it never did. Little preview what we'll do. And by the way, Dr. Gene's on assignment. So we will have Dr. Gene back Sunday morning. And of course, if you're a Football Guy subscriber, you get all of Dr. Gene's insights part of your subscription. So you get that. But
does he know CPR for generators?
Right?
I don't know if they teach that.
I don't know if they do either.
They teach a lot of stuff about generators
on that thing, Gene.
Right. There's always
take a defibrillator and put it on there.
When there's a hurricane down here, I think there's as many casualties from poor usage of generators, like running your gas generator inside of your house and getting carbon monoxide poisoning and things like that, as there is from the hurricane. So that's why we just I don't want to learn generators on the fly, but we've been learning on the fly all year, Chris, doing start sits, and let's just stick with this Russell Wilson data point thing, because we got some good smooth criminal entertainment, which what is it, Eddie? Are you okay?
Andy, are you okay? Yeah.
Are you okay? I don't know. Smooth criminals. Tua or Russell Wilson? So another data point. Let's try to triangulate Russell Wilson here. Tua gets the Jets.
No, and then what? Russ gets the Cardinals.
Arizona at home though.
At home
cooking.
Still. Yeah, and I'm getting from what the sound of it is, like Kyler Murray is expected back, or at least he looks like he's trending in the right direction.
Cliff Kingsbury's making it sound like he's not sure, but this is going to be at least a limited practice all week. But they have a bye coming up next week, so
So with this divisional matchup, I don't know. We'll see what the Cardinals offense does, but the Cardinals defense, like so far, has played like fairly well, like minus that blip, like from like what a couple weeks ago, or even this past week as well.
Yeah, it was the Panthers.
Against the Panthers.
Back.
Exactly, which was such a wonderful thing to see. But either way, I just can't. For me, I would rather lean to at this point. I mean, even in the one half that he played against Baltimore, like he looked so much better than Jacoby Brissett. I mean, even from an efficiency standpoint, I mean, the yards per drive, like when Jacoby was in, like during the first half of the game, when Tua came in, like afterwards, it was almost like night and day, like between the two. And you could almost see the team respond to when he was on the field versus Brissett. I mean, not to take away from anything. I mean, Brissett is essentially going to be a career backup, and that's fine. But Tua, for all of his faults and for how the way that I guess the coaching staff has more or less like mismanaged him at this point, at least in my personal opinion, it looks like at the very least, like the players on the field start to respond when he's out there. Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, so on and so forth. So yeah, I would lean more towards Tua, like in this particular weekend. Right, they're playing against Houston. No, not Houston. Yeah. Is it Houston this weekend?
With Tua?
Yeah,
the Jets.
The Jets, that's who it is. There's another bad team that they're playing against. So yeah, the matchup already lines up well enough for them. What we saw in just like 2 quarters or quarter and a half from last week also, gives us some confidence that it's not like he's coming in cold. He at least has some game action coming off of the injury or whatever was keeping him out of the game prior to. So I think it's a completely defensible situation for you to want to start him over Wilson, because we don't know what's ailing him at this point.
Yeah.
If it's the finger, if it's just being rusty for a few weeks, having 4 or 5 hours of sleep because he was rehabbing his finger for 19 hours a day or something, silly like he was. Yeah. So no, I wouldn't begrudge anybody for starting him Tua over Wilson this weekend.
Yeah, I think on the whole, the best way I could put it is, and Atlanta's driving, by the way, after a Mac Jones YOLO ball, as they put it in the chat room. I'm almost having to talk myself into playing Russell Wilson this week, as opposed to talk myself into benching Russell Wilson, because it's not quite a trend because it was only 1 week, although it is kind of a trend because he wasn't doing much going into the injury. Although I think the team threw for about 300 yards in that game that he went out. I think it was the first Arizona game, right? Anyway, my point is that until I see it, I'm not necessarily going to believe it. I saw just a little bit of it. Let's talk about him since I brought him up already, Matt. What do you think about Cam Newton? Cam Newton this week against Washington, the football team. Cam Newton as a pickup. Cam Newton maybe as a quarterback that you plug into your lineup down the stretch.
I would roll with Russell Wilson before I roll with Cam Newton, mainly because Russell Wilson was 11 for 16 for 152 yards against the Rams.
The Rams, sorry.
In that game, he got hurt and had a touchdown and interception. So, and looking at his numbers, honestly, if you're going to roll with he hasn't strung two great seasons together, or a season together wire to wire yet. Looking at weeks basically 4 and 5, I would say, you could. I'm gonna get into Pete Carroll positive weird thinking here and say this is a new season for Russell Wilson. So if that's the case,
he's trying to show his wares for his new team, his eventual new team.
Yeah, the Cleveland Browns. I'm thinking positive.
There you go.
Like Pete. So there we go. But with that in mind, Cam Newton's interesting, but I think the Washington football team is, even though without Chase Young, that's a big hit. I think they're figuring out some things with that defense. And they're going to be a little bit more like we thought they were going to be to begin the season. So, I understand that, you look at Newton and what did he do last week when we think, I'm going to look him up just real quick and just look at what his numbers
He had a
were.
touchdown, he had a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown on like 3 or 4 snaps.
Yeah. So, it's still kind of early for me to look at Cam Newton, say he puts on that Carolina uniform and now we can go back 5 years.
Right.
When I saw what he did as a New England Patriot, just last year, and want to hold my nose a little bit. So I think while there's better weapons out there for him, they may let him run a little bit more. They've got McCaffrey, and he can dump that ball and get some really nice looks here. I think his floor may be as high as Wilson's, maybe even a little higher, but his ceiling is a lot lower, I think. Even as maybe a guy that you would say, well, he can get those 1-yard plunges, but he's got to get down the field first.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And the Panthers' blueprint at this point probably is to win with defense and Christian McCaffrey and turnover-free football on offense, not necessarily an air show. So DJ Moore, a little bit of Robbie Anderson revival. But you're right to say that the passing game is not going to add much meat to the bone. It's going to be the running game. He does seem renewed. And real quickly on Russell Wilson, just one thing I want to add there is, what I'm worried about is if they lose to Arizona this weekend and they fall to 3-7, that's new territory for the Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll Seahawks. And if everybody in the building knows that this is probably it, and they know they're not going to make the playoffs, how does this team respond? Where's the veteran leadership, right? Like, where's the Marshawn Lynch, right? Mm-hmm. I guess Bobby Wagner. I don't know. But then other people in the building.
Are we presuming that Russell Wilson isn't a leader?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
do you think that is? Do you think it's because that it's the same people pleasing, on the mark,
Right.
not genuine personality thing that has turned you off from him for years?
Well,
nothing but positivity.
Yeah, and I'm afraid I'm going to pull Cecil here, right? And say there are things that we hear that we can't necessarily repeat. But I think you could say, I hate to go back to this because it's funny though, if we're going to do some sort of postmortem or requiem for the Seahawks, the Russell Wilson Seahawks, of course you go back to that play call and not giving the ball to Marshawn Lynch. And I just remember the reaction to that. I'm sure you remember the reaction to that, Matt. I'm sure you remember the things that people heard, what the feeling was in the locker room about that call, about the reasons behind that call. And I just think he's never totally had the guys buy in behind him the same way that other quarterbacks, like a Tom Brady, for instance, have. But anyway, that's more gossip.
Yeah, but it's a fascinating thing to think about because it also tells you, and we'll be clear. I mean, you're not a big fan of him. I am a big fan of him. So
I mean, I love his game, but I think he's kind of what's the word they use? Corny. He's kind of corny.
It's kind of corny. But it's like it's hard, when you get to the point where you're comparing a player with Tom Brady, you're doing pretty good. Like if you could say, well, they don't respond to him as well as they probably would have with Tom Brady in this situation. One play away from his second straight Super Bowl. After he basically brought them back, from the dead against probably the worst game of his life against the Packers. I mean, he played like manure on a stick for like 3.5 quarters and then was positive. And yes, he was Mr. Positivity to the point that you're looking at him and thinking you're insane, but that insanity brought them back, and it was really him who brought them back, and Cam Newton's still looking over his shoulder from the game that they had no business coming back from in a beatdown. And that I think that was in the NFC Championship game for Cam Newton to win that. I mean, Russell Wilson nearly brought him back there. So while he may not be, that's the thing. He may not. I think you have a great point that he may not have the command of a locker room, but if you think about it, he was a young player who also had a ton of veterans on that team, many of them being the defense, who were going for their second straight. And so they had a lot of vocal guys in that locker room who were strong leaders too, where he may not have had to be the overall leader of that team. I would say, Russell Wilson from now to Russell Wilson 5 years ago is probably a different kind of leader, but at the same time, it's a worthwhile point to bring up what you're saying, because maybe
it is. Well, I've been bringing up more and more, Matt, what I call the social organism that a team is, and how, because we've had so many examples of it this year. We just talked about Cam Newton. There's the Odell Beckham equation, how that affects. You can't deny that it does affect a team, whether it's that he's coming or he's going. By the way, Ty House with a good one in the chat room. Russ fails the Turing test. That's for the philosophy and computer science majors out there. And my wife, who's a fluent Spanish speaker, I mean, her maiden name is Herrera. I should really say Herrera. So of course she is. She's half Mexican. She taught me a new word today, chismoso, which means gossip. So I don't want to be a chismoso here. Instead, let's get back to some football talk, Chris. Another quarterback that you might be weighing against Russell Wilson or otherwise thinking, can he be your second half savior, is Justin Fields. The last time we saw him, he was passing downfield in the best way we had seen him do to date in his NFL career. They got David Montgomery back, and he's going to continue to hold it down in the running game. You hope, because teams get this 1 week pause, you can look at what's working, look at what's not working, maybe put some new pages in the playbook, actually tweak things. Justin Fields, and this affects how we look at Darnell Mooney, affects how we look at David Montgomery. How good could he be against defenses that are playing 11-on-11 football? Or is this all just, hey, it's Matt Nagy, so it's kind of like an airplane, like with the plug, like he's still there, he's going to pull the plug on this, no matter how good it could be.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking about that scene, like from Airplane, that still makes me laugh. It's such a good movie. But no, I think that it's there's a balance between those two forces, because I think once that Matt Nagy got David Montgomery back, it's like, okay, now I can get back into my groove as a play caller, giving Montgomery the majority of the workload, which I thought was kind of funky, considering that they had their bye week in front of them. And what if Montgomery had gotten injured in that particular game, with Khalil Herbert also playing well? I mean, I don't know, just that whole split didn't make a ton of sense to me, but it was good to see for Fields himself, like seeing more of him being like moved out of the pocket, also seeing more downfield attempts. We saw, I mean, between him and then also Mooney getting involved as well, like downfield, seeing what we're now also starting to talk about, the viability of guys like maybe even Allen Robinson, like being a part of our lineups in the future, at the very least a bench stash. Cole Kmet also coming on as well, like having 3, 4, 5 targets per week. So it's like that passing offense at the very least is stable. Now, whether it's one that we want to completely invest in and buy into, that's a whole other conversation, because over the next couple of weeks, they got Baltimore, which we just saw them getting run over by Miami. And then they've got Detroit the week afterwards. So as we inch closer to the fantasy playoffs, that's at least, I mean, if we're not buying into Fields totally, we can at least buy into his pass catcher at this point with Mooney, Kmet, maybe Allen Robinson. We'll see like how that looks like moving forward.
Right.
But I think at least those for the next 2 weeks, we have the matchups and also the health of his personnel in front of us that can give us some confidence in starting most of them. Maybe not Allen Robinson yet, but we'll get to that point. But I think Fields has shown us enough, like as his viability as a rusher, because we've seen him have at least like 30 yards over the past couple of weeks. Like the average is obviously skewed because that 101 performance a few weeks beforehand. But still, I mean, we've got the mobility. That's not going back. I mean, I don't think they can put that in the bottle. So that should continue to be a part of their game plan moving forward. But if they're also now starting to mix in more of the downfield attempts as well, I mean, that should be a more potent offense that should give opposing defenses a run for their money. And with their matchups coming over the next couple of weeks, yeah, I can buy into that for sure.
Yeah, and Fields actually has at least 38 rushing yards each of the last 4 games. So it happens real fast, right? A quarterback goes to somebody that we wouldn't even consider to somebody that we have to leave in our lineup every single week when those rushing yards get involved and we have at least a floor in the passing game. That's what we're looking for here. And it'll be interesting against Baltimore because, as I pointed out, Baltimore 6-3, you can change 4 individual plays and they're 2-7. Are they a good team? I mean, that's the NFL this year.
Right.
But that's the NFL this year. And the Bears, maybe they have a sense of renewal as the Ravens are licking their wounds after a Thursday night game last week, which was a lot more interesting than this one. A game that might be interesting, another 2 teams scratching and clawing and trying to survive, Matt, is the Eagles and New Orleans in Philadelphia. And in some ways, I wish we did shows more often, Max. I would love to just get your takes on random things that slant through my brain. But one of the ways we look at this, because we're talking about Matt Nagy, right? And sometimes, Matt, the NFL, it's like watching a nightmare, a personal nightmare for one of these coaches, right? Like we're watching a game, but really what's playing out is something where like we all can think of something in our life where it's like insanity, the definition, like doing something that's the same and expecting a different result, right? And we're watching the insanity of some of these coaches play out. Sometimes that's the actual story. It's not about the players at all, right? And Matt Nagy, for instance. Another one here, Nick Sirianni. I'm not quite sure what to think of Nick Sirianni at this point, right? I'm not sure. So you have the Eagles who have this new Jordan Howard forward identity on offense, but they are also playing the number 1 rush defense in the league. So is Nick Sirianni going to be flexible here? Could this actually be a Jalen Hurts passing game again? Because that's just how you move the ball against New Orleans. Is Nick Sirianni going to be stubborn? We might even see Miles Sanders back for this one, by the way. What's your psychoanalysis here of whether Sirianni is going to be flexible, or now that something has actually worked, he's just not going to go away from it?
I think that, Nick Sirianni is a young coach. And so young coach in a learning year. So I think whatever lessons that he's going to learn. And those lessons come from mistakes. So you probably can count on him making a mistake. I think that's the long-winded way of saying he's going to screw it up. But I wanted to be kind about it. The thing is he did say, you have the back with momentum who's playing well, seems to understand his offensive line and how it's working well. And he already said when Miles Sanders comes back, he will be the starter. So, I get that. Coaches like to do that because it's about what you're taught as a coach that you do that type of thing. It's not necessarily always the best decision. I think they have a nice 1-2 punch with Jordan Howard and Boston Scott going on right there. And if you take both those guys off the field so that you just give it to Miles Sanders all the time, who is a very talented athlete, but still has some issues here and there as a football player. Now we have an interception from the safety, McCourty, looks like. Ryan throwing an air ball out there. So you have a little bit of a, that pretty much killed an opportunity for Atlanta to get back in this game, I have a feeling, if you wanted to say they were in it. Pressure up the middle on Ryan there. But, I wouldn't count on it being handled well. I think that this is just one of those, this is a learning year for Sirianni, probably at best. And I'll just add, I want to echo what Chris said about Justin Fields being startable for sure. The only caveat I would give is just be careful of the weather because they do go to Green Bay. They are in Minnesota. Minnesota could put it, or they're going to be at home at Chicago is going to be in Chicago with the Minnesota game, and New York in week 17. So, and even Baltimore, well, not this week, Arizona in week 13. If the weather's really awful in Chicago or in Green Bay, those would be the only things that I would be a little bit concerned about, because have we really seen them play in bad weather? I mean, I know Columbus has some weather here and there, but
a little bit. Yeah.
But by the time it really starts getting into it, they're done for the year and playing in the Southlands for all the bowl games and things like that.
Yeah, this one tees right up for you, Chris, because I got to add, the FFWX is in your handle after all. It is late November. We've got games in Buffalo, East Rutherford, Cleveland, Kansas City, Philadelphia, Chicago. Not exactly winter snowbird resort kind of places. So anything on your, again, I just can't help it, radar on the weather.
It's right there. It's too easy.
Yeah, it is. So is anything you're watching, anything that people might be thinking about is they're looking ahead to their lineup decisions on Sunday morning?
Yeah, I've got, because I write the weather report each week, and there are 5 games that popped up. There are 2 with like relatively high winds, like 16 miles an hour. I don't care, but I at least want to point people in the direction that, just watch it. If it gets worse, then we'll make adjustments then. But actually the winds in Chicago will be at 16 miles an hour, at least as of tonight. Same thing in Kansas City for that big game that they'll have against the Cowboys. But I'm not worried about either of those. A little bit of rain down in Nashville. I always forget if it's in Nashville or Knoxville.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that's in Nashville. Yeah, a little bit of rain in Nashville, and then also some rain up in Cleveland, and then also out in Orchard Park where the Bills play. So rain out there as well. But again, not too worried. One of the things that I quickly look at is if there's been any change in the game total. There's been like any line movement. Nothing that I've seen so far. But then past that, just looking at how much wind. So like I mentioned, 16 miles an hour. How much rain? Very low precipitation rate per hour for each of those. So no overall concern, but just something I'll be watching over the next few days.
Stevenson with another 14-yard gain.
I was going to say, after I brought up this, should we worry about Ramondre Stevenson? He's actually pulling ahead of Damian Harris on the stat sheet, and maybe it should be worried about Damian Harris. Is Damian Harris?
Maybe it's just value? I think it's just salt away games. I think it's like Chris said, it's game script, and at this game script, they're going to give Stevenson more opportunities and flip them in and out anyway. But Harris ran harder. Like he had more plays. Let's put it this way. He had more plays to showcase his ability to break tackles and run over people, whereas Stevenson got the benefit of cutback plays where it was more finesse and trickery involved, and he got open creases to be able to work through for some bigger gains, at least earlier in this game. It's not so much that Harris was better. He just had more opportunities to look better.
I want to mention too, Matt, that I'm doing something new on the preview show now where it's relevant, or maybe where there's not a lot to talk about. I do some history on the matchup, which is fun for me at least. And I did, in honor of you and all the Browns fans out there, I did point out that Detroit-Cleveland was once the marquee game in the NFL. right?
Really?
Yes.
4 years out of 6, it was the NFL championship game from 52 to 57.
Oh,
It was
wow.
the NFL championship game for 4 years out of 6. And Detroit won 3, Cleveland won 1. And it was funny too, because they were close games until the third one. Cleveland won like 56-10. And then Detroit came back the next year and won 59-14, just to remind them who was boss.
That's cool. And I'll just say Ramondre Stevenson gets like a little delay, breaks a tackle in the backfield, starts, and leaves Grady Jarrett basically ailing on the ground, and then weaves around about 3 or 4 players, but I think it's going to get called back on a hold. But it was a beautiful run all the way to about the 12-yard line.
Right. And those plays have value. I love that from a scouting standpoint, especially for evaluating a player. Even if it comes back from a holding penalty, you saw a lot of Stevenson on that play that matters.
And that's great you do that, because when I study players in college, I don't care if there's a penalty, if it didn't directly impact the play, or it's still the play reveals what the player can do.
It's still valid.
There's still value to it. You don't just go past it.
So you mentioned, Chris mentioned the game in Kansas City. By the way, first time Patrick Mahomes plays Dallas. That's fun. That's really fun. Let's talk about Patrick Mahomes in this offense, though, Matt, because before last week, the narrative was it's not really is the offense broken, it's just is this the offense now? Long drive, dink and dunk. And look, they put up 41 points on the Raiders, but it wasn't the air show. It wasn't Patrick Mahomes' high wire act. It was just the Raiders. I mean, who knows where the Raiders are at right now with the season they've had. So, I mean, is there confidence? Does it not matter? Is it a placebo anyway? And maybe this does get their mojo back? Or are we looking back at that previous 3 weeks of Chiefs offense and say, yeah, that's probably the blueprint against a Dallas defense this week that also found its mojo again last week?
Yeah, I still trust Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, and I'm whether they're going to be able to throw down the field successfully in the vertical game or whether they're going to adjust and dink and dunk. I think it took them a little while to dink and dunk to learn how to do that well.
Yeah.
I think that's really all it was an adjustment process for them. So I trust them against Dallas. I mean, again, when we look at who Dallas has played, they played Atlanta, they played Denver, who's basically broken, and Minnesota is like the Pittsburgh of the NFC. They play up and down to their opponents. Every time I think of Pittsburgh, when I saw Pittsburgh tie Detroit, all I can think of you is Bloom going, they played down to their opponent, you know. But
it was art. As a quick interlude, that game was art, but it was art in the way like a Lars von Trier movie is art. You know, it's just it's like torture. I mean, there's art to like someone torturing you mentally. But anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty positive about Kansas City moving forward. I think that they understand who they are and what their limits are, and I think that's what the thing is the team's always pushing to try and get better, and there's a point where they don't want to say, you know, probably 4 to 6 weeks into the season, or maybe even 4 to 8 weeks into the season, they don't want to say, well, we can't do these things. They're probably thinking, how do I fix these things? Right. And then at some point you got to go, okay, we can't fix this. We just have to live with it. How are we going to live with it? And I think that's the transition that the team was going through.
Yeah, I've been doing the metaphor, Matt, of the Paris to Dakar race. You know, like you just got to finish the race. You got to keep the car on the road. It's not necessarily tuning it up to be as fast as it can be. It's because it's a marathon. As we get to the end of not quite a marathon, not quite a sprint either, of the Thursday night live show, Atlanta. New England's given Atlanta chances to make this a game, but Atlanta's just not up for that.
What are you, the 1,500 meters of podcasts? Is that
1,500 meters. I mean, 45 minutes would be like what, like a 10K? I don't know. I'm not a distance runner. So somewhere in there. Chris, I'm going to go to your backyard and ask you about those Bengals, because the last 2 games they played going into the bye, that's smart, right? Like, ouch. After this team at one point was the number 1 seed in the AFC. I'll always contend that's the opener to a trailer for a horror movie. But now maybe, again, they had that pause. There's the makings of a great offense here, and they are playing the Raiders, who just gave up 41 points. Are you optimistic about this team getting back to the form that got us all so excited like a month ago?
Yes, I am. And I think just like what Matt was talking about with the Chiefs having to understand what their limits are And with the Chiefs, it's understanding their limits. So if they can't just continue to rely on Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce in their just traditional, well, we'll just go ahead and run those like 3x1 ISOs, like for Kelce, and have him just run that 10-yard out that works every single time. But now it's not, because apparently cover 2 is just this, cure-all against Patrick Mahomes, which it isn't. But for the Bengals, they figured out that they cannot continue to rely on these deep shots to Jamar Chase. Like, they worked, and they've been like really potent, like in like a number of their games. But I think this was part of in this week's roundtable that we did with Matt Waldman. It was, they have a hell of a haymaker like in this connection with Chase and Burrow, but you also need a jab. Like you need to be able to create these just like short and intermediate passes that allow you to extend drives, and they just don't have that. And like my thought was going into the season was that, sure, you can use Chase and Higgins to run those intermediate crossers, deep outs, and then they've connected on those, and that's been fine. But using Tyler Boyd on those shorter routes, even using Mixon out of the backfield more, CJ Uzomah, I mean, they have a number of options that can also do these shorter routes that will allow Burrow to find a rhythm, allow defenses to not continue to sit on those deep routes, and then that will allow their passing game to be much more diverse and give them that efficiency and give them that potential to have a comeback or have an answer once they start to fall behind. Because they just haven't had an answer. Like once they fell behind to the Jets, they didn't have an answer. And once they, in their game before their bye, once they fell behind,
Browns,
no answer. Yeah. So it's just, unless those things aren't working for them, they need to have some other, like they need to have a plan B or plan C or plan D. And really it's just been, well, we're just going to continue to try and hit Higgins, hit Chase on those deeper routes. And if that works, great. Otherwise, they just like short circuit and they just throw up their hands and like, oh, well, I guess we'll try again next week. So I'm hoping that over the bye week, they recognize that, and just how the Chiefs figured out that, hey, we can throw this ball to Darrell Williams and it'll work, or we'll involve like, Blake Bell or Noah Gray and this stuff could work. Well, they could, the Bengals can do the exact same thing. They could do the same thing to Uzomah, to Mixon, to Boyd, find a bit more like easier ways for them to connect. Yes. They could do all these other things. And so hopefully they have, a little bit of navel gazing over the bye week, and that's what they'll do coming out of it.
I love that your cat is a Bengals fan. That's so on point, man.
I just got to say, I'm going to bring her over here again. Come on, Judy. This is our Maine Coon, and Matt, we've had some conversation about Maine Coons, and all I can say, folks, is we'll sign off here. First of all, y'all have got to see Judy, and this is like her third or fourth appearance on the show. Although I've heard that sometimes maybe with my headphones and I can't hear that she's down at my feet, like calling while we're doing the show. Maybe you all know about that, and I don't. She's a Maine Coon, and Matt and I have talked about this, so he knows. But for those of you that have had Maine Coons, I don't understand why there's not a Maine Coon in every household. She's like medicine. It's like really, she just wants to be loved, and she's so soft and she's so into it that's all you want to do is give her what she wants. And Matt, what's the story that you told me about the Maine Coon that you knew? Like to be like mopped, like they like to be moved around the floor like a mop.
I had my daughter had one, so we had one, and he was very smart, but literally he would just let me. He would want to be the mop, and he'd want me to be like the mop stick with my leg, and literally just put my foot on him and just like move him up and down the floor, and he would just purr. But he was a smart cat, because My daughter once brought someone home to watch movies with her when they were teenagers, and we let them have their kind of alone time on the couch watching their movie, and I'd just go into the kitchen and just kind of peek my eye in there, and my cat wouldn't let her like get too close to him. He would plop himself right between them, and he had kind of had a good judge of character. It turned out he wasn't a very good human being. It turned out, at least at that time in his life. I won't get into what he did. It wasn't anything with my daughter, but what we heard about later wasn't all that good. And this cat seemed to like everyone, but he didn't like that dude. And there was one other dude he didn't like, and that dude also and that was not anyone Chandler was dating, but it was just somebody else. And he was a good judge of character. Cats. He was probably the smartest cat we had, and we had a couple of smart ones. So my wife thought he was the stupidest one, but I think he fooled her.
Yeah, I just know that I'm an animal that just wants to be loved, just love, lavish, adore her.
They'll just
And-
flop. They'll
Yeah,
flop.
just I mean,
yeah.
she'll put her head down and just push it into me. And like, come on, give it up. And you
Mhm.
do, because it's such a calming experience that you get lost in, because she's so soft, she's so into it, and it's like everybody should want a Maine Coon. I mean, and then I could really wax poetic about our Siamese, which is a whole other layer experience. Really, we got to do the cat people show, Matt, and we got to get Bob Harris, get all the cat people of the football.
Yeah,
I'll get mine on camera too.
Yeah,
there you go.
See, yeah, and what's your cat's name, Chris?
We got two. One's they're both like, we call them our Black Panthers. One is named T'Challa, and the other one is named Bagheera.
Ah,
Nice.
yeah, cats are fantastic.
We love them. Yeah, we love them.
Well,
the
JC Jackson just intercepted a pass.
Yeah,
a tip Zacchaeus pass. He almost ran it back for a TD, but he stepped out of bounds here. It
Oh,
looks like
okay.
so. Yeah. But
I mean,
he got
and
it.
blame it on the game. Not blame it on the rain like Millie Vanilli.
yeah.
Blame it on the game that we're doing cat talk. But I think there is a really good theme that we can continue to think about as we're going to be signing off here for Thursday Night Live for Week 11. Learning their limits. Individuals learning their limits. Teams learning their limits. Coaches learning their limits. And it's Week 11. There's still time, right? There's still time.
How many of you play Madden out there? I know everybody in the chat room plays Madden. You play Madden enough. You've probably gone to a strategy at least a quarter or a game or 3 or 4 games way too long until you figured out that you needed to change your mind. I mean, I know that the NFL is supposed to be filled with experts, but I think that they do that on their level in some way as well.
Absolutely. We all do. That's how we live our life in these iterations, right? So there's lots of time left to still see another version of these teams learning like the Eagles have. Maybe the Bears will be next, the Chiefs maybe. And we're going to try to learn along with them, with all of you. We love sharing this journey with you folks. It's enjoyable. Even whenever the games are this boring, we love getting together and spending time with each other. That's what it's all about here at Football Guys on the Audible. We love you, for Matt, for Chris, for Gene on assignment. We love you always because you're so classy.